Hello dear viewers, welcome to the new video. As you can see, the channel name has been changed. More on that in the next video. And today I'd like to share with you my first open tournament game. So this was not the first game of chess I played, but it was the first game in an open tournament. So it happened in 1995 and I started playing in 1992 when I was about 12 years old. And let me give you some context. So in those days, perhaps internet existed, but actually it existed for sure, but it was not so common in my country, and I didn't even have a computer. So um, my main source of practice of chess was playing with my friends. So in 1992, I played with my friends, and we were not strong players. Yeah, we just played in one of each other's home, or if it was summer on the street. Then in 1993 or maybe 1994, there was an optional course. It's not a course, it's like in school, a side activity. So if you wanted, you could come 2 times per week for 40 minutes or 1 hour, I don't know. There was an elderly teacher who was maybe 2000 FIDE strength or something like that, and he would give us lessons, like he would show us some opening tricks, some end games, and he would teach chess on those old boards that were hanging on the wall, and he would move the pieces with his hand and reading the moves from the book. And I studied on my own. I had a book that I got as a present. It was not a great book, but it was something to study from. And I got some magazines. These magazines were from Czechoslovakia, and I didn't even speak the language, so I was just looking at those diagrams and trying to figure out. And I could understand a little bit, maybe between Serbian and Czech language, there is maybe 40% similarity or 50. It's not so easy to understand, let me tell you. So I was trying to figure out what were they saying in those magazines that I somehow got hold of. So in 1995, I decided to play in my first open tournament. Prior to that, I did play some tournaments, but they were scholastic events, just like kids playing against each other. So I chose this vintage background for this presentation, so we have a feel of how the diagrams in that Czechoslovakian magazine looked like. Let's see the game. So my opponent was around 2100 FIDE. I'm not exactly sure, but I remember he was slightly above 2100 FIDE, and I had no rating. He was white, and he opened with e4, and I replied with e5. And quickly we got into the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish game, as they call it. So keep in mind that my preparation was maybe non-existent. Yeah. So what was my preparation in those times? I would look at some games and try to catch some ideas. So I knew that this is the Spanish game and this is how it is often played. So I followed that road, and my opponent took on c6, the so-called exchange variation of the Spanish game. Today it is not that popular, but I can understand my opponent's thinking. So he was maybe in his 40s, and he saw a boy, maybe 15-year-old boy, and he probably thought, okay, let's go to the end game. Kids are not good in the end game. Also, you cannot compare it to today's time. Today, you have kids 11 years old that are already master level, or some of them are grandmasters at 12 or 13. So in those days, a 15-year-old kids usually were not that strong, especially if they were not rated. It means they didn't start at age 6, 7, or 8. So I think my opponent chose the correct approach, but maybe he underestimated my abilities. And my opponent followed up with the most straightforward line. This is how it was played 120 years ago, maybe. Players would quickly exchange queens, and the basic idea was that black has these doubled pawns on the queen side. So these four pawns can be blocked by these three pawns in a pawn endgame, while these four pawns on the king side cannot be blocked by these three in a pawn endgame. If we are talking about piece endgames, like with rooks on the board or with other pieces, black can drum up some counterplay. But if white manages to exchange all the pieces, he's just winning. So I assume my 40-year-old opponent thought, okay, this kid, maybe he doesn't know this, so we will just exchange all the pieces and I will win. This is one possibility. Another is that with his pieces he will somehow outplay me. So, not a bad plan against an unrated player, I must say. In this position, black has many plans. I chose bishop d7, and some of you who are well versed in chess theory might say, dude, this is like the most modern approach. Yeah, but I didn't know that. Why did I play this move? So maybe sometime before playing this game, I saw a game in this opening played by black with black pieces by Paul Keres or Keres. I don't know how exactly to pronounce. So people who are well versed in chess culture know who was Paul Keres. He was one of the strongest player in 30s, 40s, 50s, and he had a nickname Eternal Second because in many of his important tournaments where he was fighting to become a world champion or a world champion challenger, he would finish second, so just a step short of reaching his, I guess, lifelong dream. So I saw this game by Paul Keres, and he developed his bishop to d7, and he had some sort of a plan that he executed with knight going to e7, castles, and quickly rook h to e8. So you see, this is how I actually um, not prepared, but this is how I played openings. I would see a game, I would see an idea, and then I would try to replicate it in my games. When it worked, it was great because I would replicate the idea of a very strong player, and usually it was a good idea. But sometimes my opponents wouldn't let me, and then I would have to come up with something else, and sometimes it backfired. So let's see a few more moves. Bishop e3 was played, and I castled. So this is the Keres idea to quickly castle. And after knight d2, I played bishop c5. I'm not really a fan of this move. So here, my opponent played knight b3, but I'm thinking, what happens after knight f5? Because one of my assets in this position is the bishop pair. And with this move, perhaps white can get rid of this bishop pair because, well, if I exchange, there is no more bishop pair. Yeah, and if I take here he can take this bishop, and now I have to retreat somewhere, I don't know, and there is no bishop pair, and white is getting closer to that pawn endgame. I'm not sure if this is the correct approach, but somehow it feels like here white could um, at least eliminate the bishop pair. Let's go back to the game. So in this position, instead of knight f5, knight to b3 was played. So white attacked my bishop. So I just retreated. And actually this is where the bishop wants to be. f4 was played with the idea of e5. So I stopped it. Next was castles, I think. And after knight e7, knight f3, I achieved my dream setup. I mentioned that Keres game, and in that game, Keres had something like this. So I had a goal, and I managed to get there thanks to my opponent not disrupting this play. And here, it is already a little bit sensitive for white, so he needs to be careful because this bishop is unprotected and it is x-rayed by this rook. Also, the e4 pawn is not protected, so there are some tactical possibilities if white is not careful. The move white played was rook a to d1, a natural move putting his rook on an open file, but it's a mistake. And I told you about this bishop not being protected, so maybe you can already see what was played. Knight f5, excellent move. So attacking that bishop. So if the bishop moves, we also attack the pawn. So we just win a pawn for free. If the bishop is somehow protected, same story, maybe even worse. Yeah, white just loses a pawn. So in this position, white captured my knight, but then I captured his bishop. So I didn't win material, but there was a dramatic change in the pawn structure because you remember I had doubled pawns here and white had the pawn majority on the king side, but now white also has doubled pawns, so now pawn endgames are not losing for me. So there is no danger of me exchanging pieces anymore. On top of that, I have kept my bishop pair and my pieces are more active, and as you can see, my pawns, my doubled pawns, they are back, they are safe, but his double pawns, they are a little bit far away from his base, so they are in danger of being attacked and probably one of them might drop. Actually, right now, um, both of his pawns are attacked. So how to protect them? If you go with the knight here, opening the rook and defending one of the pawns, then after c5, once the knight moves somewhere, I don't know, actually doesn't have good squares, so then white can choose which one to capture, or if maybe this is best to sacrifice a pawn like this. But this is a big advantage to black, probably winning an extra pawn and better piece placement. Okay, so let's go back to the position where both of his pawns were attacked. So he chose knight h4, defended the f pawn from here, and the f4 pawn is now protected by the rook. Well, that was reasonable, but I learned even in those days that it is good to place a rook on the second rank, and I did that, attacking this pawn, and now there is no good way to protect for white. If he goes to c1, That's very passive. Yeah, so his pieces are completely out of play. If he protects with the rook from f2, then this rook had an important function of protecting the pawn, so I can simply exchange and capture on f4. That's why he chose to protect with the rook from d2. So what did I do? I took the rook, and after knight takes, I took advantage of the unprotected piece that is being x-rayed by my rook. With the move bishop takes f5. A simple but also pretty move. And what is interesting is that in the same game there were two tactical shots on the f5 square. First it was knight f5, if you remember, taking advantage of the pin, and now it is bishop takes f5, taking advantage of the x-ray. So when white took, there is this check opening the rook. King went to h1, and now rook d2, and as a result of this little combination, black won a pawn and simplified the position further. And also he got another rook on the second rank. So if you remember a few moves ago, there was a problem for white that this rook was annoying on the second rank, threatening all kinds of things. And right now, after the smoke has cleared, another rook appeared on the second rank, and this one is even more annoying. Here, my goal is to pick up as many of white's queenside pawns as I can, and to promote one of my pawns, or all of them. So what happened? White took on g7, I took on c2, with the idea of taking more. If he protects, then I can go after this guy, probably. So he didn't do that, he protected indirectly, because if I capture now, my bishop drops. So I had to first retreat the bishop. And this move also introduces a threat of bishop taking f4, and when rook takes, checkmate is coming. So that's why white spent tempo on making a luft for his king, but then I took another pawn, and after knight g7, I took the last of white's queenside pawns. Now we come to the race part of the game. So white attacked my pawn, and I defended it. Then he played rook d1. My guess is that he wanted to cut off my king, because if my king comes somewhere here, his pawn, his extra pawn is meaningless, and the four guys on the queen side will easily decide. So I started to march my pawn, and I'm really surprised. Actually, I'm not surprised, but I'm happy that even then I understood that this pawn is the furthest from this king, and also the queening square of that pawn is of the same color as my bishop, so this might be helpful. So g4, white starts to run with his guys, a4, g5, takes, and I win a tempo here because he cannot push. This one is unprotected, so he needs to spend the tempo on that, so he chose knight f6, and now rook b2. With the deadly threat a2 and rook b1, rook cutting off the king helps a lot. Alright, knight took on h7, and white does have two connected passers, but black's pawn is already too far advanced. And after g6, rook b1, he played g7. So it looks like this pawn will promote, and I took with check. And now there was an option to just make queen and let white make queen 2, and then let's say we defend. There is one check, king goes to the side, and of course white king will be checkmated. But I chose another option, So probably I didn't even see the other option. But for me, it was just important. That's my guess, to get rid of this guy. So I gave this check, and my opponent resigned because if he takes the rook, I promote with check, and then I have an extra queen. So that is the finish of the game. Rook g1 was the final move, and I must say I'm really surprised with the level of play here. So sometimes I wonder, have I improved over the following 30 years? uh, well, I probably have, but the thing that strikes me is that I saw all these one move tactics, two move tactics very accurately, and yeah, and these were the times when there was no internet, so you couldn't play online and practice. You had to sit by yourself and make the moves over the chessboard and sometimes play with your friends. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed seeing my first ever rated game. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye.